Mongolia, Ulaanbaatar, the capital city resting in a valley surrounded by four sacred mountains, a place where ancient nomadic traditions coexist with Soviet-era architecture and the emerging modernization that's slowly transforming this isolated nation. Early July 1972. The annual Naadam Festival, Mongolia's most important cultural celebration, transforms the entire city into massive gathering honoring the three games of men, wrestling, horse racing, and archery, traditions that trace their origins directly to Genghis Khan's armies, and that remain central to Mongolian cultural identity, despite decades of communist rule attempting to reshape traditional society. The main festival grounds occupy several square kilometers on the city's outskirts, temporary structures and permanent stadiums hosting hundreds of thousands of Mongolians who travel from across the vast steppes to participate in or witness competitions that determine national champions and that carry prestige extending far beyond mere athletic achievement. This is cultural preservation through living practice, demonstration that Mongolian traditions survive intact despite pressures from Russian influence, Chinese historical claims, and the general modernizing forces that threaten to erase distinctive cultures worldwide. The atmosphere combines carnival celebration with deadly serious competition and profound spiritual significance. Families camp in traditional gers, felt-covered circular tents, that dot the landscape for miles in every direction, creating temporary nomadic city that mirrors how Mongolian ancestors lived for thousands of years before urbanization and collectivization. The smell of arag, fermented mare's milk, and mutton being roasted over open fires fills the air. Traditional music played on morin khur, horsehead fiddles, provides constant acoustic backdrop. Vendors sell traditional crafts, foods, and ceremonial items. Children run freely through crowds wearing deals, traditional robes, in bright colors and elaborate patterns. But the festival's heart is the three games, particularly Buk, Mongolian wrestling, which holds status as the most prestigious competition and which draws the nation's attention more intensely than any other sporting event. Buk differs fundamentally from other wrestling styles. No weight classes separate competitors. A 150-pound herder might face a 350-pound champion, with victory going to whoever forces any part of opponent's body except feet and hands to touch the ground. Matches occur outdoors on grass without time limits, sometimes lasting hours when evenly matched wrestlers test each other's strength, technique, and endurance. Wrestlers wear zodog, open-fronted jackets that expose the chest, and shoedog, tight shorts, that allow judges to see clearly when legitimate throws occur. The wrestling carries profound cultural meaning extending far beyond sport. Champions become national heroes whose fame rivals political leaders. Success in Buk demonstrates the warrior virtues that Mongolians believe define their people: strength, courage, cunning, endurance, honor. The tradition connects directly to Genghis Khan, whose armies conquered the largest contiguous land empire in human history, partly through superior cavalry tactics, but also through hand-to-hand combat skills that Mongolian warriors trained through wrestling from childhood. Modern Mongolians view Buk excellence as proof that Genghis Khan's legacy lives in their blood, that they remain warriors despite no longer riding across steppes conquering enemies. Bruce Lee's presence at the Naadam Festival represents highly unusual intersection between Hollywood celebrity and remote cultural tradition that normally receives no Western attention. He arrived in Mongolia through complex arrangements involving the Chinese government, Mongolian Cultural Ministry, and various intermediaries who saw potential propaganda value in showing American martial artists of Chinese descent honoring Asian traditions in communist-aligned nation. The visit serves multiple political purposes, while also allowing Bruce genuine opportunity to experience martial culture he's studied theoretically but never witnessed directly. He spent 2 days at the festival, observing wrestling matches, speaking through interpreters with wrestlers and trainers about their techniques and training methods, watching the elaborate pre-match rituals, including the distinctive eagle dance that champions perform before and after bouts, absorbing the cultural context that makes Buk something far more significant than just athletic competition. His approach has been completely respectful, performing appropriate courtesies when introduced to wrestling elders, asking permission before photographing or filming techniques, offering genuine appreciation for skills he recognizes as legitimate and sophisticated, even though developed completely independently from Chinese or other Asian martial arts traditions he knows. The Mongolian wrestling community's reaction to Bruce's presence has been mixed and complicated by cultural and political factors. Some wrestlers and fans appreciate that famous martial artist shows interest in their traditions, viewing his presence as validation that Buk deserves international recognition alongside kung fu, karate, and judo. Others feel suspicious about foreigners' intentions, wondering whether he's genuinely interested in learning or whether he's gathering material to use in movies that will present Mongolian culture inaccurately or disrespectfully. A significant nationalist faction resents the attention Bruce receives, viewing him as representative of foreign cultures that have historically threatened Mongolian independence and cultural survival. The wrestling competitions have been running for 2 days. hundreds of matches determining rankings that narrow the field toward the final championship bouts that will crown this year's national champion. The current competition features wrestlers who've advanced through multiple elimination rounds, demonstrating sufficient skill and strength to remain viable contenders for the title that carries more prestige in Mongolia than Olympic medals or any other athletic achievement. Among the advancing wrestlers, one man dominates both physically and psychologically: Batulga the Mountain Erdene, the defending national champion and the most imposing figure in Mongolian wrestling's modern era. 6'6", 380 pounds of muscle, bone, and scar tissue accumulated through 15 years of constant training and competition that began when he was recruited from herding family at age 13, specifically because his unusual size suggested potential for Bukh greatness. His physical presence alone intimidates opponents before matches begin. Shoulders so broad they appear wider than some competitors are tall, arms thick as normal men's legs, hands large enough to palm human heads, thighs that could crush ribs if applied in proper hold. But Batulga's reputation extends far beyond just physical advantages, to include his cultural significance and his role as symbol of Mongolian national pride during period when the nation struggles with identity questions, about relationship to Soviet influence and Chinese historical claims. He speaks publicly and frequently about Genghis Khan's legacy living through modern Mongolian warriors, about Bukh representing authentic continuation of fighting traditions that made their ancestors unconquerable, about the importance of preserving Mongolian culture against foreign contamination and modernization that threatens to erase distinctive traditions. His nationalism resonates deeply with Mongolians who feel their small nation and unique culture are constantly under threat from larger neighbors and global forces pushing assimilation. Batulga has won the national championship 4 consecutive years, defeating all challengers through combination of superior size, technically excellent wrestling refined through countless hours of daily practice, and psychological intimidation that makes many opponents defeat themselves mentally before physical contest even begins. His nickname, the Mountain, references both his size and the Mongolian cultural belief that mountains are sacred, eternal, and unconquerable, exactly how Batulga views himself, and how many Mongolians view him as representative of their national character. This afternoon, between scheduled matches, Batulga is conducting informal demonstration for the crowd, showing traditional techniques and explaining their historical connection to Genghis Khan's era. Several hundred spectators gather around the wrestling area, watching as the Mountain easily handles practice partners who are themselves accomplished wrestlers, but who appear almost child-sized when grappling with someone Batulga's dimensions. Then, someone in the crowd mentions that Bruce Lee is present at the festival, watching from the elevated seating area where honored guests and foreign dignitaries have been positioned. The information reaches Batulga through one of his training partners, who points toward where Bruce sits quietly observing, wearing simple Western casual clothing that contrasts with the traditional Mongolian dress most festival attendees wear. Batulga's expression changes immediately when he sees Bruce. His face shows mixture of contempt and opportunity. Contempt for foreign martial artist whose presence seems to diminish attention that should be focused entirely on Mongolian traditions, and opportunity to make public statement about Mongolian superiority that will resonate with nationalist sentiments many festival attendees share. He speaks loudly in Mongolian, his voice carrying across the immediate area and drawing additional attention from spectators. "We have honored foreign guest today, famous martial artist from Hollywood who makes movies about fighting. But I wonder if he understands real fighting. Not choreography for cameras, not techniques practiced safely in training halls, but actual combat where strength and power determine winners." The crowd reaction shows they understand Batulga is setting up confrontational teaching moment. Some spectators look uncomfortable, recognizing that guest is being disrespected. Others show excitement at prospect of seeing their champion demonstrate Mongolian superiority over foreign martial artist who represents cultures they view as threatening their traditions. Batulga continues, now speaking in heavily accented English so Bruce can understand directly. "Bruce Lee, Hollywood Kung Fu man. You come to Mongolia to watch our wrestling. But watching is different from doing. Do you believe your martial arts could work against Mongolian wrestler? Against traditions of Genghis Khan that conquered the world?" The challenge carries obvious nationalist subtext. This isn't just about comparing fighting techniques, but about defending Mongolian cultural pride against perceived foreign superiority. About proving that Mongols remain warriors despite no longer conquering empires. About demonstrating that Genghis Khan's legacy lives through modern Bukh champions who carry forward authentic fighting traditions that Hollywood movies cannot match or diminish. Bruce remains seated initially, clearly recognizing this is public challenge designed to create teaching moment at his expense. The Mongolian cultural officials who arranged his visit look alarmed, not having anticipated this confrontation and concerned about diplomatic implications if the situation escalates badly. But Batulga isn't finished. He walks closer to the seating area where Bruce sits, his massive frame drawing every eye in the growing crowd. I don't mean disrespect to your movies or your martial arts, but Mongolian wrestling is different from Chinese kung fu. We are descendants of warriors who conquered China, who ruled your ancestors, who built empire larger than any in history. Our strength comes from that heritage. Genghis Khan's blood flows in us. Your techniques might look impressive on film, but against real Mongolian warrior, he spreads his enormous arms wide. Against this, I think your kung fu becomes very small. The statement is deliberately provocative, invoking historical Mongolian conquest of China to suggest inherent superiority, using Batolga's obvious size advantage to imply that physical dominance trumps technique, framing the comparison as cultural competition where Mongolian traditions must be defended against foreign martial arts that threaten to overshadow them in international perception. Several Mongolian wrestling elders look uncomfortable with Batolga's aggressive approach, but his status as four-time champion and his role as cultural symbol make direct intervention difficult. To contradict him publicly risks appearing to side with foreigner against Mongolian warrior defending their traditions. Bruce stands slowly from his seat, his movement calm and controlled, despite hundreds of eyes watching his response to what's clearly public challenge impossible to ignore without validating exactly what Batolga wants to prove. He walks down from the seating area toward where Batolga stands in the wrestling grounds, his smaller frame making the size difference even more dramatic as he approaches. Batolga towers over him by nearly a foot, outweighs him by approximately 250 pounds, presents physical presence that suggests any confrontation would be predetermined by simple physics and mass advantage. Champion Batolga, Bruce says respectfully in English, knowing translators will convey his words, your buck wrestling is impressive and carries profound cultural significance. Your people's warrior heritage deserves deep respect. I would never claim that my training is superior to your traditions, or that I could defeat you in buck wrestling following your rules where size and strength provide such significant advantages. Batolga smiles, interpreting Bruce's diplomatic response as concession. But you think your martial arts training allows you to defend yourself against someone my size in real confrontation? Not wrestling following our rules, but actual fighting where I'm not restricted by tradition about how to defeat you? I think different martial arts optimize for different contexts. Bruce responds carefully. Your buck training is optimal for the specific challenges Mongolian wrestling presents. My training addresses different scenarios. Neither is absolutely superior, just adapted to different purposes. Very diplomatic, Batolga says, his tone suggesting diplomacy equals evasion. But let me ask directly, if we faced each other, not in sport competition but in actual physical confrontation, do you believe your techniques would work against me? Against warrior carrying Genghis Khan's legacy and 380 pounds of Mongolian strength? The crowd has grown to several thousand people now, word spreading rapidly that defending champion is publicly challenging foreign martial artist. That confrontation is developing that will test Mongolian warrior pride against Hollywood kung fu. The energy is electric with anticipation and nationalist fervor. Bruce recognizes he's been maneuvered into position where refusing validates everything Batolga wants to prove about Mongolian superiority. He looks at the cultural officials who arranged his visit. They nod reluctantly, giving permission for whatever he decides. Try me, Batolga says with absolute confidence, his massive arms spread in invitation. Show these people whether kung fu works against true warrior. Show us whether Genghis Khan's descendants can still conquer those who think technique defeats power. Several thousand spectators form an enormous circle around the area where Batolga and Bruce will demonstrate, the crowd energy combining excitement with nationalist fervor and genuine curiosity about whether foreign martial artists' techniques can function against Mongolian wrestling champion whose size and strength appear overwhelming. Batolga removes his deal outer robe, revealing the traditional Zodog wrestling jacket beneath, his massive torso showing the heavily muscled development that 15 years of constant book training creates. Pronounced chest and shoulder muscles, thick arms, visible core strength despite not being particularly lean. The overall impression of raw power built specifically for grappling and throwing opponents regardless of their resistance. Bruce remains in his simple, casual clothing, his lean muscularity appearing almost fragile in comparison, despite the obvious conditioning visible in his frame. The visual contrast could not be more extreme. Batolga looks like someone carved from mountain stone. Bruce looks like someone who could be broken by anyone with significant size advantage. Traditional Mongolian wrestling rules are set aside by mutual agreement. This won't be Buk competition where touching ground with anything except feet and hands determines defeat. This will be demonstration of what happens when Chinese martial arts principles meet Mongolian warrior traditions in direct physical exchange without sport restrictions. Same as I tell young wrestlers, Batolga announces to the watching thousands, size and strength matter. Technique is good, but power is better. Genghis Khan's armies conquered because they were stronger than enemies. That truth doesn't change. He looks at Bruce. Ready, little martial artist? Bruce nods calmly. Ready, champion. What happens in the next 7 seconds will be witnessed by thousands of Mongolians whose nationalist pride is deeply invested in seeing their champion demonstrate cultural superiority, who expect size and strength to prevail over foreign techniques, who believe Genghis Khan's legacy guarantees Mongolian victory in warrior confrontations. Batolga advances with the confidence of someone whose size has dominated every physical encounter throughout his entire life. He doesn't rush or commit recklessly. His wrestling experience has taught him patience and tactical discipline. He moves forward steadily, arms extended to establish grips that will allow him to use his tremendous weight and strength advantages to control and throw Bruce in demonstration of Mongolian physical superiority. Bruce doesn't retreat, doesn't try to maintain distance and avoid the grappling that would favor Batolga's size. Just stands calmly, watching the larger man's approach with complete attention. Batolga's massive hands reach for Bruce's shoulders and upper arms, standard Mongolian wrestling grips that utilize superior reach and strength to establish control. His technique is fundamentally sound. His intentions clear, his confidence absolute that once he establishes grips, his size makes the outcome inevitable. Bruce's hands move the instant before Batolga's grips can close, not blocking the advancing arms but making contact with Batolga's wrists in positions that seem impossibly light and insufficient for controlling someone 380 pounds. 2 seconds elapsed, but those seemingly gentle contacts find specific anatomical structures where precise pressure affects each nervous system function and mechanical advantage simultaneously. Batolga feels immediate disruption in his grip strength and hand positioning that his extensive grappling experience never prepared him for, because Book training emphasizes different principles than the tactile sensitivity Bruce's Wing Chun Foundation developed. Batolga tries to compensate by using his superior strength, by forcing his grips to close through raw power that should overcome whatever subtle technique Bruce applied. 3 seconds. But Bruce's footwork has already pivoted, moving his center line offline from Batolga's forward pressure, while maintaining those light wrist contacts that continue creating disruption in the larger man's ability to establish the controlling grips his wrestling depends upon. Bruce's other hand establishes contact with Batolga's elbow, creating leverage relationship that redirects the champion's committed forward pressure past him rather than into him. 5 seconds. Batolga's enormous frame, moving forward with 380 pounds of committed momentum, suddenly has no target making proper contact. His hands close on positions Bruce no longer occupies, his balance shifting from stable forward pressure to transitional vulnerability as his mass continues moving in direction his body was committed to before his target disappeared. Bruce steps to Batolga's side, precise positioning placing him outside the champion's power structure, establishing control on Batolga's shoulder while maintaining leverage on the arm, creating geometric relationship where attempting to use strength to pull away or reset actually works against the larger man's own stability. 7 seconds total. Batolga finds himself moving in direction he didn't intend. His legendary strength somehow useless despite being obviously superior, his 15 years of wrestling training providing no solution for the combination of timing, positioning, and leverage that Bruce applied so smoothly. The transition from Batolga's confident advance to Bruce's complete control seemed almost effortless to those watching closely enough to understand what occurred. Bruce guides Batolga's massive body toward the ground, not throwing him violently or forcing him down. Through superior power he doesn't possess, but simply positioning and controlling the champion's structure so that remaining upright becomes biomechanically impossible despite tremendous strength and competitive instinct to resist. Batolga's knees contact the grass, not hard impact, but controlled descent demonstrating complete technical dominance. His arm is positioned at angle that prevents rising without risk of injury. His 380 pounds of muscle and Genghis Khan's legacy are completely neutralized by positioning that makes resistance counterproductive. The thousands of watching Mongolians go absolutely silent. No cheering, no commentary, just stunned processing of what they witnessed with their own eyes, but cannot reconcile with their cultural assumptions about size advantages and Mongolian warrior superiority. The silence extending across thousands of spectators is profound and unprecedented at Naadam Festival, where crowds normally provide constant noise. Bruce releases the control immediately and steps back, then does something that shocks the assembled Mongolians even more than the technical demonstration. He drops to his own knees in front of Batolga, assuming position of respect and reverence, bowing deeply toward the champion who remains kneeling. "Champion Batolga," Bruce says clearly through the translator who rushes forward, "your size and strength are gifts from your warrior ancestors. Your Buk wrestling is sophisticated art refined through centuries. Your dedication to preserving Mongolian traditions honors your people and your culture. What just happened doesn't prove my martial arts superior to your wrestling. It proves that different traditions develop different capabilities that work through different principles." He continues, still kneeling. "Your wrestling optimizes for contexts where size and strength can be fully applied, where opponents understand the same grips and techniques, where traditional rules create framework for competition. My training addresses different contexts. How to deal with larger, stronger opponents by controlling timing and position before they can establish the advantages their size should give them. Neither approach is absolutely superior, just optimized for different challenges. Batulga remains kneeling, his expression showing the profound confusion that occurs when direct personal experience violently contradicts beliefs held with absolute certainty. His voice when he speaks is quiet, lacking the confident aggression from minutes earlier. How did you... I couldn't stop it. I felt it happening, but my strength was useless, like fighting smoke. You felt it happening because your wrestling training makes you highly sensitive to pressure and position, Bruce explains. That same sensitivity allowed you to recognize I was controlling you, even though you couldn't prevent it. Less experienced opponents wouldn't even understand what was occurring until they were already controlled. He stands and offers his hand to help Batulga rise. The champion accepts, 380 pounds being pulled to standing by 135 pounds of leverage and positioning. The physics seeming impossible, yet happening before thousands of witnesses. They stand facing each other, the size difference remaining extreme, but something fundamental having changed in how that difference is perceived and understood. One of the Mongolian wrestling elders, a man in his 80s who competed in Naadam during his youth and who now serves as judge and cultural guardian, steps forward from the crowd. His weathered face shows deep lines from decades of life on harsh steps, his traditional deal indicating his status as respected elder whose wisdom exceeds mere technical knowledge. He speaks in Mongolian, the translator conveying his words. What we witnessed is teaching about humility and wisdom. Champion Batulga defended our traditions by challenging foreign martial artists. This showed warrior spirit and pride in our heritage that honors Genghis Khan. Bruce Lee demonstrated capability that exceeded what our assumptions prepared us to recognize. This showed that warrior spirit exists in many forms across many cultures. Both deserve respect. He turns to address Batulga specifically. You carry responsibility as champion not just to defeat opponents, but to represent our culture with wisdom. Today you learned that confidence based only on our own experience creates blindness to capabilities we haven't encountered. This is a valuable lesson that makes you better champion, not worse one. Then to Bruce. You honored our traditions by demonstrating without claiming superiority, by kneeling in respect toward warrior you just controlled, by teaching rather than humiliating. This shows understanding that technique without wisdom damages rather than builds relationships between different martial cultures. The elder's words provide framework for the crowd to process what occurred without feeling that Mongolian culture was diminished. The silence begins breaking as spectators discuss what they witnessed, their conversations mixing amazement with reassessment of assumptions about Mongolian warrior invincibility. Batulga bows deeply to Bruce, the gesture showing genuine respect. I apologize for my arrogance and my disrespect toward your martial arts and your culture. I assumed size and strength guaranteed victory because they always have before. You taught me that assumptions require testing, that confidence without understanding creates vulnerability, that true warrior must remain humble enough to learn from those who approach combat differently. Bruce returns the bow with equal depth. Champion, your apology is unnecessary. You did exactly what warriors should do. You tested your beliefs honestly rather than just asserting them. You accepted results with integrity rather than making excuses. This demonstrates the character that makes you worthy of the championship you hold. The crowd's energy shifts dramatically as the elder's blessing and Batulga's humble acknowledgement create space for celebration rather than shame. What could have been national embarrassment becomes teaching moment that reinforces Mongolian values of courage, honor, and wisdom. Several spectators begin traditional chanting that celebrates warrior spirit regardless of victory or defeat, recognizing that both men demonstrated the qualities Mongolian culture values most deeply. Young wrestlers who watch the exchange push forward through the crowd, their faces showing mixture of shock at seeing their undefeated champion controlled so completely and excitement at witnessing techniques they've never encountered in their traditional training. Several ask Batulga in rapid Mongolian whether he will train with Bruce Lee, whether they can observe such training, whether these foreign principles can be incorporated into Buck without violating the tradition's sacred character. Batulga raises his massive hand for silence, then speaks to the young wrestlers with authority that his championship status grants. What I learned in 7 seconds is that our Buck wrestling is powerful and effective within the context our ancestors designed it for. But the world is larger than our steps, and warriors may face opponents trained in ways our tradition never anticipated. Learning to recognize and address these unfamiliar approaches doesn't betray Genghis Khan's legacy. It honors it. Our ancestors conquered the world partly by learning from those they encountered while maintaining their Mongolian identity. We should do the same. The statement represents a significant shift in Mongolian wrestling philosophy, coming from defender of traditional purity, who moments earlier was invoking cultural superiority and nationalist pride. His transformation from arrogant champion to humble student carries weight precisely because of his previous certainty and his willingness to acknowledge being wrong publicly before his entire nation. Cultural officials who arranged Bruce's visit look relieved that the confrontation resolved without diplomatic incident or lasting damage to Mongolia-China relations that both governments wanted this visit to support. They approach Bruce and Batulga, proposing that the remaining festival days include organized exchange sessions where Mongolian wrestlers can learn principles Bruce demonstrated, while Bruce can study Boke techniques in greater depth, creating genuine cultural exchange rather than competitive proving of superiority. Both men agree immediately, recognizing opportunity to transform what began as nationalist confrontation into productive learning that serves both martial cultures while building respect and understanding between peoples whose historical relationships have often been marked by conflict and mutual suspicion, rather than cooperation and shared pursuit of martial excellence. Over the following 3 days remaining in the Naadam Festival, the relationship between Bruce and the Mongolian wrestling community transforms completely. What began as nationalist confrontation evolves into genuine cultural exchange that benefits both sides and that creates lasting impact on how Mongolian wrestlers understand their traditions. Batulga requests private training session with Bruce, his earlier arrogance replaced by authentic hunger to understand what he experienced. They meet in quiet area away from festival crowds, working together for several hours as Bruce demonstrates the principles of sensitivity, timing, and positioning that allowed him to neutralize Batulga's size advantages. The champion's 15 years of wrestling provide strong foundation for understanding these new concepts. His highly developed kinesthetic awareness, the body sense that elite wrestlers possess from years of reading opponents' movements through physical contact, allows him to grasp sensitivity principles more quickly than someone without grappling background. He recognizes that Bruce's techniques don't replace Boke wrestling but address scenarios his traditional training never explicitly prepared him for. My entire wrestling career, I've faced opponents who understand same techniques, who attempt same grips, who respond in predictable ways, Batulga explains through translator. Against you, none of my experience applied because you operate on completely different principles. Not better principles necessarily, just different ones my training never addressed. Bruce nods. That's exactly right. Your Boke wrestling is highly sophisticated within its context, but any specialized system creates both strengths and limitations. Understanding your limitations doesn't diminish your strengths. It makes you more complete warrior by revealing what additional training might address. Other Mongolian wrestlers and trainers observe these private sessions, their initial skepticism about foreign martial artists teaching their champion gradually transforming into recognition that Bruce offers legitimate knowledge worth incorporating. Several ask permission to train with Bruce themselves, seeking to understand principles that might enhance their wrestling without abandoning the traditional foundations that define Mongolian martial culture. The wrestling elders hold formal meeting to discuss implications of what occurred and what lessons should be drawn for future Mongolian wrestling development. The conversation reveals generational and philosophical divisions within the community. Older elders emphasize importance of preserving traditional Boke exactly as transmitted through centuries, warning against contamination from foreign influences that might dilute authentic Mongolian heritage. Younger trainers argue that incorporating effective principles from other martial traditions strengthens rather than weakens Bush by addressing scenarios traditional training doesn't fully prepare for. The senior elder who spoke after the demonstration provides wisdom that bridges these positions. Our duty is preserving Mongolian wrestling tradition that connects us to Genghis Khan and our warrior ancestors. But preservation doesn't mean refusing all change or learning. Our ancestors conquered half the world partly by learning from peoples they encountered, adopting siege warfare techniques from Chinese, administrative systems from Persians, diplomatic strategies from various cultures. They preserved Mongolian identity while incorporating useful knowledge from outside. We honor that legacy by doing the same, maintaining our Boke foundations while learning principles that make our warriors more complete. This balanced approach gains consensus support, leading to decision that Mongolian wrestling curriculum will incorporate some sensitivity and timing drills inspired by Bruce's demonstrations, while maintaining traditional Boke techniques and training methods as the core foundation that defines their martial heritage. Batulga becomes passionate advocate for this integrated approach. His status as four-time champion and his willingness to acknowledge being controlled by smaller opponent give his arguments credibility that preserves his authority rather than diminishing it. At public gathering during festival's final day, he speaks to assembled crowd about what he learned. 7 seconds taught me more about warrior spirit than 6 years of being undefeated champion. I learned that true strength includes recognizing what you don't know. That confidence based only on past victories creates blindness to new challenges. That Genghis Khan's legacy means being willing to learn from anyone who demonstrates capability, regardless of their size or origin. Bruce Lee honored our traditions by testing them honestly and by teaching with respect rather than arrogance. This is how warriors should engage, with confidence in our strengths, but humility about our limitations. The speech receives sustained applause from thousands of festival attendees, his words providing framework for Mongolians to accept what occurred without feeling their cultural pride was diminished. The incident becomes teaching story rather than national embarrassment, because Batolga's response demonstrated the wisdom and character that true champions possess. Bruce's remaining time at Naadam includes watching Batolga successfully defend his championship in the final matches, his wrestling showing subtle improvements from incorporating awareness of timing and positioning principles that their brief training addressed. The champion dedicates his victory to the foreign warrior who taught me that strength without wisdom creates vulnerability that real enemies will exploit. The final championship match itself becomes demonstration of how quickly elite athlete can integrate new principles when properly motivated and when those principles align with existing sophisticated foundation. Batolga faces challenger who had defeated him once 3 years earlier in regional competition before Batolga's rise to national dominance. A technically excellent wrestler named Temujin, who weighs 310 pounds and who specializes in patient defensive style that frustrates aggressive opponents. The match proceeds cautiously for the first several minutes, both wrestlers respecting each other's capabilities, probing for openings, working for advantageous grips that might create throwing opportunities. The crowd watches with intense focus, recognizing they're witnessing highest-level bukh competition between two of Mongolia's finest wrestlers. Then Temujin attempts technique that has worked for him successfully in previous matches against Batolga, a specific grip sequence that sets up his signature throw. But Batolga's newly developed sensitivity to subtle weight shifts and grip pressures allows him to feel Temujin's intention developing before the technique fully commits. He adjusts his positioning fractionally, just enough that when Temujin executes the throw attempt, Batolga's structure is already positioned to neutralize it rather than being vulnerable to it. The counter happens so smoothly that most spectators don't recognize what occurred. They just see Temujin's throw fail where it succeeded before. But wrestling elders and experienced competitors notice the difference immediately. Batolga didn't use more strength or better traditional technique. He used timing and positional awareness that allowed him to intervene before Temujin could establish the control his throw required. The match continues for another 8 minutes before Batolga executes successful throw that puts Temujin's shoulder to ground, winning his 5th consecutive national championship. But the victory is secondary in importance to what Batolga demonstrated about integrating new principles with traditional excellence, about evolution within tradition rather than abandoning it, about genuine champions' willingness to continue learning even after achieving what most consider complete mastery. In the post-match ceremony, when Batolga performs the traditional eagle dance that champions execute to honor their victory and the sport's spiritual significance, he adds unprecedented gesture. He bows deeply toward the section where Bruce sits watching, acknowledging in front of the entire nation that his victory benefited from knowledge gained from foreign martial artists. The gesture creates brief controversy among the most traditional spectators who view any acknowledgement of outside influence as diminishing pure Mongolian achievement. But the wrestling elders publicly support Batolga's honesty and his recognition that warrior excellence comes from many sources. The cultural impact extends beyond just wrestling community to broader Mongolian society, grappling with questions about national identity, relationship to larger neighbors, and how to preserve distinctive culture while engaging productively with wider world. Batolga's transformation from nationalist defender rejecting foreign influence to advocate for selective integration while maintaining cultural core provides model that resonates with Mongolians across various domains struggling with similar tensions. Journalists covering the festival write extensively about the Bruce Lee encounter and its implications, their articles appearing in Mongolian newspapers and reaching international press through wire services. The coverage ranges from nationalist criticism of Batolga for acknowledging foreign superiority to progressive celebration of cultural exchange to balanced analysis of how traditions must evolve to remain relevant without losing essential character. Bruce's departure from Mongolia includes formal ceremony, where Wrestling Federation presents him with traditional deal robe and symbolic wrestling title honorary rather than competitive, recognizing his contribution to Mongolian martial arts despite never competing in book. The title translates roughly as foreign teacher who showed warriors their blind spots, a recognition that could be interpreted as insulting, but which Mongolian culture intends as profound honor, acknowledging that the most valuable teachers are those who reveal what you don't know rather than just confirming what you already believe. Batolga accompanies Bruce to the airport for his departure, their final conversation reflecting the genuine friendship that developed through honest combat and mutual respect. "I challenged you to prove Mongolian superiority," Batolga says through translator, his English still limited despite attempts to learn. "Instead, you taught me that no culture owns warrior spirit, that strength comes in many forms, that true champion never stops learning. This is gift more valuable than another championship title. Bruce's response carries equal warmth. You gave me gift as well, champion. You showed me that traditional cultures contain wisdom, that modern innovation sometimes dismisses too quickly, that size and strength are real advantages that technique must account for rather than denying, that responding to defeat with grace and curiosity rather than defensiveness is mark of true warrior. I'll carry these lessons forward in my training and teaching. Their embrace before Bruce boards his flight, is captured by photographers, and becomes iconic image representing possibility of cultural exchange, transcending nationalist competition, of warriors from different traditions recognizing shared values despite surface differences, of honest testing creating brotherhood rather than enmity when approached with proper spirit and genuine respect for capabilities demonstrated regardless of their cultural origin. Years later, after Bruce's death in 1973, Mongolian wrestling community maintains connection to his legacy through continued emphasis on the principles he introduced. Batolga eventually becomes head trainer for the national wrestling program, incorporating sensitivity drills and timing exercises into curriculum while fiercely preserving traditional buck techniques as the foundation. He tells the story of their 7-second encounter to each new generation of wrestlers as a lesson about humility, continuous learning, and the distinction between defending traditions and being imprisoned by them. The incident influences Mongolian cultural attitudes more broadly, contributing to gradual opening toward international martial arts exchange while maintaining fierce pride in distinctive Mongolian traditions. The wrestling community begins occasional exchange programs with martial artists from other cultures, seeking to understand different approaches while confidently maintaining that Buk wrestling remains central to Mongolian identity and incomparable in its cultural significance. In 1990, after Mongolia's democratic revolution and opening to the West, Batolga travels to the United States for first time, visiting Bruce Lee's grave in Seattle to pay respects to the martial artist who transformed his understanding through 7 seconds of honest exchange. He leaves traditional Mongolian offering of mare's milk and blue silk scarf, symbols of respect and eternal connection between warriors who met as potential enemies, but parted as brothers through mutual recognition of genuine capability and shared commitment to warrior excellence. That's what happened when 380-pound Mongolian wrestling champion publicly challenged Bruce Lee at Naadam Festival, saying, "Try me," while invoking Genghis Khan's legacy and Mongolian warrior superiority. Not just 7 seconds where timing and positioning neutralized overwhelming size advantage, but complete transformation of how Mongolian martial culture understood relationship between tradition preservation and necessary evolution. Demonstration that defending cultural heritage doesn't require claiming superiority over all other martial traditions. Proof that warrior spirit transcends specific cultures and recognizes genuine capability regardless of its source. If this story revealed something about humility, testing assumptions, and learning from unexpected sources, subscribe for more truths. Comment where you're watching from and whether this changes how you think about cultural pride and openness to outside knowledge. Mongolia, July 1972. Naadam Festival. Thousands of witnesses. 6'6" defending champion invoking Genghis Khan's legacy. Try me, challenging foreign martial artist. 7 seconds later, the mountain controlled and kneeling. Humility replacing arrogance. Training programs transformed. Cultural attitudes evolved. Legacy continuing decades after through Mongolian wrestlers who honor both their traditions and the lessons learned from honest exchange with different martial culture.